I wanted to start with an image of dancing around the fire. This is our history. This is how humanity grew up. And if you think about the evolution of human beings over millions of years, we were doing this every night, dancing naked around the fire. And I really think that part of the human being is developed in this context. That here we were engaged in this really powerful communal ritual of moving our bodies and seeing other people's bodies and seeing how we compare to them, and they're different bodies, but we're all the same. Like a school of fish, you recognize your own kind. And I think there's a really powerful way that this kind of registers our psyche and makes it possible for us to be able to relate to the rest of our tribe. And I find, I've never really been able to experience that, but I find that it must be a really, really powerful ritual. And we don't have any rituals like that anymore. We have nothing that really binds us to the community like that. And I think it's a real loss. I think that part of the existence of the erotic crisis is due to that loss. Indigenous cultures are really good at this stuff, and they've kept that for a good reason, I think.
It still happens right here in the U.S. I'm actually a part of a group that does that.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, good for you.
Regular, that's a thing that we do every Sabbath.
Wow. Well, maybe you can speak to the.
It's the most beautiful. It's the most beautiful, powerful thing you can really be a part of in a group like that, because you're really competing with everyone. You might not even know that person's name, but you recognize them across the fire.
Yeah, I've kind of assumed that this is how we grew up, because you can see the evidence of it in the way our culture works today. So I've talked about the bifurcation between these different value systems, like the horizontal values of religion and the vertical values, the hierarchical values of the church, and the difference between the Puritan value system and the pornographer's value system. And all of these, the male and female, the right brain and left brain, all these conflicts are embodied in each of us. So we carry those conflicts, and the conflict itself is really a powerful generator. And there's a lot of fear that comes out of that conflict, but there's also a lot of creativity that can be pulled out of it. And so finally, after all the bad news, we're going to talk about some of the good stuff we can do to kind of rescue our bodies from being subsumed by a machine. So there's an image that keeps appearing in our culture just spontaneously, which is what I've been calling the logo of advertising. It's the image of the young woman's body, and it appears everywhere in our culture. It's on TV, in the movies. You can sell anything with it. It's kind of like a dream. It's just bubbles out of the culture, and it's been doing that increasingly over the last 100 years, since I think there's a connection with advertising. And I'm not a scientist or anything, so I can't say that for sure, but I sure recognize the effects of that.
Certainly mass media and advertising is about a 100-year-old thing.
Yeah, right. So one of the things I always wondered about was why the image on the men's magazine is the same image that's on the women's magazine. This is an example of how this image, this logo, keeps just spontaneously appearing. And I think the reason is because there's something in it that we need. Kind of like the capitalist, the pornographer's materialist advertising world tries to flatten that image down into its sort of least passionate form, which is titillation. That serves its purposes, and it's kind of like the junk foodization of everything. So this image is junk food. There's just enough in it to keep us alive, but not enough to actually feed us. And so I think what it does is it speaks to the hunger that we carry around with us all the time. So there's something that we need, some kind of medicine that is missing from our culture. And I think this image contains that medicine. The Puritan in us sees the exploitation and wants to get rid of it. And that's what all the legislation has been about, making yoga pants illegal and that kind of thing, trying to get that image out of our space, because it's very uncomfortable. But I think if we can not be distracted by the culture of distraction and take a look at that image, we can unpack it and be able to get the nutrients we need out of it. Let me take you through the layers of desire that I talked about 2 or 3 weeks ago, that get packed down into the very thinnest layer possible, which is titillation. both the pornographers and the Puritans want to flatten the image into titillation so that you feel something but very little. Because, of course, the advertiser can turn that into selling a product, and the Puritans can make you feel guilty, and so they can kind of control your life in a way. So if we take the lid off that and start looking into what lies underneath, we'll find sex. That's the first thing that pops up. And I find this a little bit troublesome because I really believe that we give at once too much and too little attention to sex in our culture. Freud says, what we can't possess deeply, we display outrageously. And that's exactly what we're doing. You know, as an adolescent culture, being creeped out by these kinds of images in an outrageous fashion. That's the way the images come to us in the media. Another quote that I really love is by Ashley Montagu in his book, Touching. It came out probably 50 years ago. The frenetic preoccupation with sex that characterizes our culture is in many ways not an expression of sexual interest at all, but rather a search for the satisfaction of the need for contact. And for me, I feel like one of the reasons sex is so powerful psychologically is because it's a great symbol of connection. And so here at this level, you know, this is what romanticism is all about in the West, is this idea that there's another kind of a dream figure that you get to fuse with, and that together two people make one. And you know, it's a beautiful idea, and it's really, I think, kind of the theme of the universe, opposites coming together and creating something new. And so it's not that this level isn't really important, it's really important, but we also need to expand beyond it. So if you keep digging, you get to the next level, which is sexuality and relating to the rest of the world, really in a kind of a social way. How is your body life related to the other people in the world? Tragically, a lot of our deep desire for connection is ignored because the culture of distraction really wants to flatten everything and sexualize it. And sex is that first layer underneath titillation. And so that's the thing that we worry about. We take the lid off, you see sex, and you think, oh God, the lid's going back on. But desire is in this whole range of possibilities. So beneath sexuality is all of the meaning and the mythology that the body entails. And that's going to be our next topic, so I'll just skip over that for the time being. And then picking that apart again, you get to the feminine principle, which is everything in the culture that is repressed, everything that we don't celebrate in a patriarchy, basically. And then keep expanding that, and you get to the grand beauty of everything, nature and the universe, which is the most fundamental passion that we have. So all of these things are this whole range of a passionate life that just gets squashed down into titillation. So when we begin to open that up, all of that stuff becomes available to us. And that's why there's so much energy, even in that flattened image. It's hard for us to identify what the different parts of that are. My wife comes home and she says, take off my blouse. Oh. And then she says, take off my skirt. And then she says, and I don't want to see you wearing my clothes anymore. There's a way in which, you know, we're full of these kind of desires that feel a little bit sexual because of what the culture does, but are really something else. And I think we really would do ourselves a service if we could pick apart each one of those desires and follow what those are pointing to. Sex is really beyond our understanding. It's the part of humanity that is permanently wild, and we will never be able to penetrate the meaning of that. It will just forever be beyond the horizon of our understanding, which I think is kind of a cool thing, that we are created with that mystery just locked inside of us. But for that reason, it has all this imaginational energy. It's I just think, fiendishly attractive because of that wildness. So I did a film a few years ago called Leave Bodies, that is taken from a phrase from a medieval mystic. Teresa of Avila says, our bodies are the leaves of God. And I love that image because the leaves are part of the tree, and the community is the tree, and we're all, connected in this beautiful way.
It makes me think of something else that I think it's coincidental, but I think really poetic, and that's that in many languages, leaves are what is the same word for sheets of paper. It's the same word.
Right.
In medieval times, it definitely was.
Well, in this case, what I'm doing is writing on people's skin, so it's the parchment. The leaves.
Yeah, that's part of it too. I'm thinking of that. I'm thinking, wow.
So the body is this incredible symbol. It's our oldest symbol. If you look at art history, the first images we see are human bodies. And it's also the most expansive. It just refers to everything. In some ways, it refers to everything in the universe. But you can think about, the components of eros, harmony, ecstasy, humility, pathos, beauty, vitality. The list just goes on and on. And there are even symbols that are directly opposed to each other, like strength and vulnerability. And all of this is symbolized in the body. And that's, for me, why it's just an endless kind of mine of material. And as we've seen in the last few lectures, it's also so emotionally charged that you'll never outgrow the image of the body. So an artist who gets obsessed with the body like me just never runs out of material. There's really no more nuanced and profound and complex image in anything that we have available. Thomas More has this wonderful quote. He says, "In our society, sex is wounded by a deep-seated masochism, which finds distorted satisfaction in the suppression of desire. The masochism is a symptomatic and destructive form of surrender. Instead of giving in to our passions, allowing emotion to course through our bodies and psyches, and generously offering ourselves to intimacy, we surrender our joy in life to any authority we can find. And we find many authorities willing to condemn us for our longings and pleasures." So we're constantly having our passions dampened by the institutions around us. And what I want to do is to lift up the fact that all of that stuff is original. It's all created in us. And the body is the image of the human, of all of our capacities and our flexibilities, but it's also the image of the divine, as Genesis tells us. We're looking at the human body, you're seeing divinity. And so it unfolds in all these different ways. The nude is the most beautiful form in creation. I can go on and on about what it represents: nature, the earth, the sensuous life, the feminine, relatedness, the present moment. Carl Jung talks about the energy between the anima and the animus, the dialogue between the masculine and feminine inside each one of us, the male and female spirits. And as a man, I live all my masculine characteristics, a lot of my masculine characteristics on the outside, and my feminine characteristics are on the inside. And so I kind of look like that iceberg. I'm trying to discover the feminine depths. And as a woman, you live a little bit oppositely. You live out your feminine characteristics, and your masculine characteristics are somehow buried. But we live in a patriarchal culture, and so it's a very different situation for each of us. This is a sculpture I call syzygy, which is actually the two combined into one figure. And to me, this rehearsal of that dialogue just never runs out of steam. There are all these different layers of meaning of the attracted opposite. So the most important symbol, I think, that we need to be aware of in the culture of distraction is that between the masculine and feminine. The shadow, as Carl Jung and Freud both talk about the shadow of your psyche is the part that is really unacceptable in society. So everything that you are, that you can't kind of publicly be. So my thief and rascal is a guy that I kind of keep hidden. And I try to be my sort of delightful and humorous person on the outside. But I still have all those components on the inside. And the shadow is constructed like this. So the cultural shadow is an image of the abandoned woman's body. which is exactly what we're seeing coming up out of the ether. Susan Griffin, in her book Pornography in Silence, says, "A woman is a particularly striking symbol in the patriarchal civilization. We read that the sight of a woman contains the image of everything that rises up from the depths. But the voyeur, when he sees a photo of a woman's body, keeps these depths at a distance. An invisible line separates him from the image he perceives." So why, out of all the images in the universe, does the human body strike us as the most beautiful? These are some of the reasons. But also, there's the aspect of beauty itself, which really plays a big part in evolution. And I just picked up this great book, The Evolution of Beauty, which is about the scientific appearance of beauty. And beauty is not a scientific principle. So a lot of scientists really come down on it. But Darwin talked about this, that, especially in birds, this is a kind of guinea hen that has this incredibly elaborate feather decoration. They produce somehow, out of evolution, this incredibly complex design that is really generated by the female sense of what is beautiful. And there are bird species, there are like 50 different species of the same bird that have slightly different mating characteristics and feather designs and all this. And it's just fascinating to look at this and think, well, what is beauty about? And here we are, human beings, we're seeing the beauty in ourselves, and I think it's part of the same process. Even in this really, really materialistic culture, the most valuable objects around us is art. You can find a half-meter piece of canvas with a bunch of paint smeared on it that's worth $500 million. I think that's just astonishing. That, part of that is just performance, but part of it is the fact that art is really important to us. Beauty is a really valuable part of being alive. So there's a couple of other things that I wanted to point out that I'm not going to talk about, but I think are really fascinating. One is the symbol of the nude as being as having to do with honesty. So when I draw from the nude, one of the things that is really apparent to me all the time is this person is sharing something really intimate with me in a moment when I find the very, very rare experience where I absolutely know for sure that this person is being honest with me. And how many times does that happen in your life? It's really kind of incredible. And the other thing I wanted to point out is the incidence of nudity as a political power. And we've seen this like in the Mirabai film. Mirabai, did this incredible thing with her body that has sent ripples throughout history. One person wandering in the woods that makes this profound impact on history. I just think that's pretty incredible. We've seen in recent years how protesters, especially in Eastern Europe, have used the body as a protest tool. And I became really fascinated with this culture that I didn't discover, but I discovered for myself recently in the Amazonian jungle. This indigenous group, a bunch of different groups, but particularly surrounding the Xingu River basin in the Amazon. These people, they have these very fascinating rituals. This one is the women gang up and attack a man and tickle him. And I just find it so fascinating. I would love it if we would target people in this culture this way. I mean, this is something I would love to do to a guy like Orrin Hatch. Strip him naked, send a bunch of women in there and tickle him to death. I mean, I think we really need that.
Oh, we need it, but there's no way it would ever get by in our culture.
Right. Speaking of which, there's all these things that are really alive in the world that are very mysterious to us. Here is a dance from one of these tribes in the Amazonian jungle, where the women, the whole culture is almost everybody is nearly naked, but here the women are marching by the hundreds in the center of the city, and they create this really, really powerful dance that is totally alien to us. We just do not understand the mechanism of this. And I'll give you a close-up here. I find this just absolutely captivating. Even watching this video on the little screen, I really get the sense of the enormous amount of power that is let loose in this community. So, I won't keep going with that, but I just find that so captivating. It's a part of our world that is just simply not available to us in this world, and we have it's a possibility of something we could recover from the ether if we had the imagination. And so I think all those possibilities are before us in some degree. I think it's really hard to find it in this particular cultural situation. But if we can begin to imagine taking charge of that kind of thing, I think it'd be really cool. Our flesh is really the root of our humanness, and if you think about something so esoteric as morality, it just makes no sense outside of the flesh. That's one of the reasons why we have to keep our bodies from being subsumed by the machine. In our incarnation, the spirit and the body are intertwined and are meant to be so on this earth. We're intended to live out of both aspects of our natures. The flesh is filled with such vitality that it's always been really frightening to religion. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Puritans have that kind of terrified attitude in front of the flesh. For centuries, the organized religions have, for that reason, really denied the flesh. And I think a perfect example of that is the official costume of the Catholic Church, where all the guys, their heads, basically heads, and their bodies have disappeared. And for the women, gosh, it's just their faces that have survived. Everything else is just sort of pushed off to the side and ignored as if it's going to go away somehow. And that's not just a Catholic problem, it's in all kinds of...
Yeah, it's very symbolic, though.
Yeah,
sure.
Right. And I really believe that there's another way of approaching our passions, and that is to follow the lead of the desires that we have. And if we can stay to the path of love, I think any desire will lead us in the direction of salvation. So my idea is that maybe in the future, Puritans and the pornographers should trade techniques. So the Puritans have the desire to protect the body through the purity of desire in the interest of salvation. And the pornographers, they exploit the body to stimulate desire in the interest of generating sales. And I think it would be really interesting if they just trade techniques. If the church had the wherewithal to exploit the body to stimulate desire, something like what I just showed you, this celebration of the flesh in the interest of finding desire as a motivator, to be used in the service of salvation, then the pornographers would be forced to abandon the images of the body that are used to make sales and would have to be more truthful about what they're actually offering. And what they could do is to protect the body through the purity of desire. So instead of being terrified that our bodies are going to be dragging us into hell, we could be terrified that our bodies are going to be subsumed by the machine. It's not that big a jump. It's just a matter of shifting our desire and our motivation. I find that a really compelling possibility, even though it's pretty far from where the culture is today. But if we can start to imagine these things, we can start to come up with a new way of living with our flesh. It'd be lovely if the church celebrated the body and was able to really bring that image forward. I mean, how great would it be if you go to church and you start seeing these beautiful bodies? I mean, God, the churches would fill up right away. I mean,
I'd be tired of it again.
I have this vision that we could figure out a way to create a kind of community values celebration, something like the Mass, without disturbing the very delicate and weird balance that religion has in the world right now. There's no way we could ever unite humanity in some kind of religious way. But there is a way that we can make the body, the temple, of the divine again. Certainly you can believe that I find my own flesh to be sacred in a way that I never want it to be hurt or violated. And if I can believe that about myself, certainly I can believe it about you. And if we can believe that about each other, then perhaps we can extend that feeling to the other human beings around the earth, owners of bodies. And I think it would be really wonderful if we could figure out a way to make the sacredness of the flesh the center of a kind of community celebration of values. And we have nothing like this outside of religion right now. But I've been thinking for years of creating some kind of a celebration that would encompass some of the wisdom we've heard from various traditions and the beauties that we find in our flesh, and be able to celebrate the embodied passions that are of the fabric of who we are in this world that is threatened by the machine. And I think if humanity is going to survive the machine, it's going to take something like that to survive. So I wanted to play for you one more thing, another creation that I did. It's a kind of a letter to my niece, who is 16 years old, in 100 years. My niece hearing from her great-granddaughter.
September 13th, 2121. Dear Great Nana, thank you for the lovely roller skates. Now that I am 12, you are exactly 10 times older than me. I think that's so awesome, to use your word. I hope I can roller skate as well as you when I get to be your age. Mom says you're right about the world changing so fast. Last night we went to like a big party at a beautiful palace here, like a cathedral. They have one there every night. They're all dressed up, but it's nothing like the church you remember, because everyone wants to sit in front, and you have to go early to get a good seat. Most people in the celebration wear glitzy, feathery costumes, but some wear hardly anything, so the body shows through. The children sing the daily calls, each coming in with a different animal. Then they parade in the sacred objects, and there's music and beautiful smells and lights, and we sing soft and then suddenly really loud. Then it goes dark, and a dancer comes in with a script painted on his skin. He's followed by another dancer and another, each with a different color skin, with words all over them. That's how the story is told. It's so beautiful. In one part, an old man with a really smirched up face stood up to read the message and even got really quiet. He talked so funny we could hardly understand him, but he read so beautifully that even Daddy cried. Then really loud music from the back and fire from the ceiling and lights and people on ribbons flying through the air to make your heart stop. I even sang and raised my hands and didn't care if people judged me. I didn't want it to stop, but afterwards there was a feast and storytelling, and then, which was maybe my favorite, the whole community danced around a big fire. I don't remember the rest because I fell asleep. I can't wait to go again tomorrow night. I told my friend Maya that back in the olden days, when you were young, every night people would sit at home all by themselves to watch other people do interesting things on a big screen. She didn't believe me, of course, because where's the fun in that? I wish you were here, Great Nana. I love you. Love, Polly.
Oh, great. Well, thank you. Living in the sacred body, it's safe for us to move beyond the historical dogma that we've inherited and to re-envision our connection to the body, to the woman, and to the earth. So that's our assignment.